working on growing quahog clams along with my oysters since 2017, and hoping to share some of this info with you. It's been working out quite well. Been working with partners Mananet in the last year, and has received funding from Northeast SARE, which is Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education, and Sea Grant. So what exactly is this? This is not growing clams as a maximum capacity, maximum efficiency clam farm. This is developing a secondary crop for subtidal oyster farms. So when you see the floating bag systems out, they typically just use the top portion of the water column, and people are often licensed for the bottom for storage. So trying to find ways to use more of the vertical water column to grow another crop. And this is important because it's, instead of displacing oysters, which are more valuable than the hard-shell clams, it's growing them in a place where the oysters are not optimally grown. In the sediments, particularly in my site, very soft sediments that would suffocate oysters. So why would we do this? I think it's trying to increase the yield of a farm, so not just having a single crop, but having another crop to a different market. It's a similar market in that it's another live product. So oyster farmers can sell to their dealers that are looking for the half-shell market. And it's at a very low cost of entry. The equipment needed to do this work, which we'll see in a second, is just the same sorts of soft mesh oyster bags that are used throughout the industry for farming. Having diverse crops would help, again, insulate against changes in market prices. We've seen oyster prices jump up and down considerably in the last 3 years, and can add to some disease resilience, having another crop that is not necessarily susceptible to the same diseases as oysters. And there's a unique opportunity in that clams grown in aquaculture are not constrained to the size limitations as wild clams, so you can harvest smaller, which lets you get stuff to market sooner, but it also keeps you from competing against the wild market. This is competing against things like manila clams and cockles, but there's no local analog. No one's growing these non-native species here, but you can grow a small clam to take the place of these small clams that are coming from Washington State or as far as New Zealand. So it's really a different product that we're working with here. And then the other section of why, and I'll promise I'll have some pictures after this, there's, by intensifying farms, you can grow more on the same footprint. So ideally not conflicting with other fisheries, not conflicting as much with recreation or wildlife, and maybe when farms are expanding more into the water column, are you're getting more out of the same footprint, so hopefully getting more out of aquaculture with less impact to other users. And this version of clam farming versus seeding flats, which are traditionally commons, which people have been using forever, this is a way to do it in subtidal waters where people aren't clamming. And again, this product doesn't directly compete with the wild quahog because you're harvesting at a different size. So this is roughly what it looks like. So the top part there, those would be floating oyster cages. And you run a secondary long line in the footprint that you would be using for overwintering oysters. You'd use, we'll see in the next slide, the high-density polyethylene bags that you would use for growing oysters within a cage. And those bags just sit on the sediments or sink slightly into the sediments. This is, it's just adding 2 vertical lines and really just using the exact same footprint of your lease or LPA that you would be using for overwintering. Here's a closer look at the equipment. When the clams are small, you do have to use some weight to keep them falling straight down if you're in an area with high currents. And so, yeah, you connect these oyster grow bags to a long line. The long line is sink. It rests in the mud on the bottom until you're ready to pull them up. And it's out of the way and within that same footprint. There's real benefits to this design. It's very, very little fouling. With stuff sitting on the bottom, it's not picking up invertebrates. I've not had them pick up algae. I'm in relatively deep water. I'm in about 20 feet of water, but it's worked quite well and been very, very, very little labor. I mean, it's generally pulling up the long line and then hauling your muddy bags out of the mud so they prevent them from being buried too deep and suffocating. And so really, at my site, it's about once a week pulling on these ropes. Maybe takes an hour for 3 LPAs. Yeah, so it's a way to increase what you have on the farm with very little equipment costs and really very little labor. There are some major challenges right now. The biggest being that the largest clam seed you can get in the state for hardshell clams is 1.5 millimeters this coming year. And dealing with the nursery is quite difficult. A lot of the equipment is not really built well for dealing with clams of this size, particularly without an upweller, which is expensive. So we're working on new nursery methods using different meshes. We're going to build some downwellers this year. We have new funding. So to try to get these clams big enough to go into that system I showed you before, where they can just go in the traditional sort of oyster aquaculture bags. But in the meantime, we've been going through small meshes that live inside the oyster cages, taking up some space that the oysters would normally be using right now. And so graduating tiny, sand-like clams up through different meshes in the oyster cages until they're big enough to go into the sinking system. We've seen really excellent growth. So I started in 2017. My first clams came to market in September of this year. This is a smaller market size. This is about over 40 millimeters in length. The buyers are looking by length. The regs are for 1 inch deep for wild stuff. So this is less than 1 inch deep, but it's again not competing against the wild clams. These are being marketed like a cockle or a manila clam. We can see various success with the varying degrees of success with the seed and the pink lines. The first year, we got seed up to 11 millimeters in a single season. The following years, it was 6 or 4 and then 6. So we're really trying to perfect the nursery phase. It's been quite difficult, but hopefully here there might be some larger seed in the market available in 2021, and hopefully our nursery methods will produce some larger seed. And so this is kind of a look at what the final product looks like. These are, again, smaller than traditional quahogs. They're a bit sweeter. They taste, and that might be because they're small enough to be pre-reproductive. We're not sure. We're hoping to test some of this out. They have had pretty favorable reviews from different restaurants I've brought these to. One of the other challenges we're working on is that these large clams compared to wild clams are really fragile. So finding ways to handle product when it's reaching market size is one of the major challenges we're working on. They seem to crack quite easily. We've heard that might be because of just their fast growth, having weaker shells. They're not thinner shells, but they are weaker shells. So figuring out ways to both handle them less and handle them more gently before bringing them to market. Because the losses are quite high at this stage, and very, very low until this stage. And that's a look at one, maybe even a little smaller than I was selling, but I sold all the ones that were picked up to sell. And that should be it, probably a little short.